As many of you know, I just celebrated a milestone birthday. I always assumed that getting older and hopefully wiser would involve a process of synthesis and simplification, that all of the bewildering variety and complexity which one encounters when young would eventually coalesce into simpler universals and truths. While to some extent, and in some instances this has happened, I've been surprised by an interesting corollary. Instead of things getting simpler, they've actually gained in complexity. I have learned that some things that were put forth as simple truths within the context of a body of information espoused and disseminated by books and teachers were actually at their core more complex and sometimes just plain falsehoods and myths. And somewhat disturbingly, I have discovered that self-education and the quest for truth is far from the passive process of digesting in an unexamined and unquestioning fashion information put forth by established schools and pedigreed experts. For me, the search for truth hasn't become easier. It requires more energy, diligence, and intellectual skepticism than ever before. And the fruits of that search tend not to be simple and cohesive, but complex and ephemeral. If anything, the challenge has intensified.
Say thanks to Ron Levy for his sharing about how the journey to wisdom is a journey from perhaps simplicity towards complexity, and how so much of what we thought we knew turns out not to be knowledge. I rejoice in my journey to call myself a Unitarian Universalist. To the extent that my theology matters, I agree with both of those U's. U for Universalist, as in love wins, and Unitarian, as in one God at most. And here at USR, I find my views on justice reflected back to me. At the same time, I'm happy to be speaking today about a topic worth disagreeing with. As Frank Bruni said, ambivalence and ambiguity can be apt responses to events we don't yet understand, with outcomes we can't predict. And when we're dealing with subjects where much is in doubt and many questions don't have one right answer, there's not only room for disagreement, there's an absolute need for disagreement. Can I say it? Sometimes UUs are too polite. We agree too much. We too are subject to herd mentality. World Population Day raises issues that truly demand ambivalence and ambiguity. There really are few simple answers, and yet we need to struggle our way into this thicket of complex and interrelated realities if we hope to make sense of the world we are leaving to the next generations. To make this journey, we must, as Reverend Karen Hutt told the UUA General Assembly 2 weeks ago, acknowledge our fear and relinquish defensiveness. Replace the characteristic of objectivity with particularity. Replace the characteristic of power hoarding with sharing and listening. Replace the characteristic of fear of open conflict with honesty and authenticity. Replace the characteristic of paternalism with real mutual regard. And let us stop thinking there's only one right way and cultivate cultural humility. As I have learned again and again, cultural humility is a very precious commodity, especially among the intellectual spiritualities. We think so clearly that we are usually so right. Malthus was wrong, and so were the predictions of the population bomb. It turns out we can feed a much larger population than was previously thought. But why are so many people hungry today? It has to do, I think, with greed, nationalism, and white supremacy, more than agricultural technology. The UN has been working on global development goals to eliminate poverty, but that progress has been set back by the pandemic. It's too early to tell what the pandemic's impact will be on world population, but some preliminary data show decreased birth rates in addition to the excess deaths. What will the results be? Nobody knows yet. What we do know is that the impact has been far from uniform. Those who can least afford it suffered most, and those who were well off before did even better during the pandemic. The human history of population control has at various times and places included eugenics, infanticide, pro-natalist schemes, restrictive immigration, genocide, and family planning. And our Unitarian and Universalist history is as complicated as any predominantly white and dominant class religion can be. We've put together a little bit of our own history, and I'd like you to listen to this, take a look at our own readers, and wonder at the history.
At the end of the 19th century, many liberals saw hope in the new science of eugenics as it embodied a kind of evolutionary optimism. Many believed that the births of stronger, smarter, and even more attractive babies would signal the coming salvation of the world. In the ensuing decades, prominent religious liberals became enthusiasts for eugenics. Their stories reflect our faith in science and how our hopes for a better world can engender gross violations of human freedoms and rights.
Unitarian Universalists today, who uphold the inherent worth and dignity of every person as their first principle, would be shocked to read the title of a book published in 1902 by the American Unitarian Association. The Blood of the Nation, a study of the decay of races through the survival of the unfit. The author was David Starr Jordan, president of Stanford University. Jordan was a pacifist, raised in a Universalist household, but Jordan's pacifism was based on a belief that war is a biological evil. It kills off the physically and mentally fit and leaves behind the less fit. He declared that poverty, dirt, and crime produced poor human material. It is not the strength of the strong, but the weakness of the weak which engenders exploitation and tyranny, he wrote in The Heredity of Richard Roe. Weak people bring failure upon themselves and ultimately will bring failure on the nations they live in if they are the ones who survive and reproduce. War, Jordan believed, robs the race of its most vital blood.
In 1924, a Virginia law aimed at the sterilization of the unfit to prevent the passing on of their genetic heritage was tested with the case of Carrie Buck. Carrie Buck was scheduled to be sterilized under the new law. She had been raised in foster care, been raped, became pregnant, and given birth all before the age of 17. She was considered part of a shiftless, ignorant, and worthless class. The judge ruled the operation should be done. Appeals eventually took it to the Supreme Court. Unitarians Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. and William Howard Taft voted with the majority, upholding the ruling, with Holmes writing the decision. These are Holmes's words.
We have seen more than once that the public welfare may call upon the best citizens for their lives. It would be strange if it could not call upon those who already sap the strength of the state for these lesser sacrifices. It is better for all the world if, instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough.
In the early 20th century, progressives, including a number of Unitarians, were very enthusiastic about eugenics. Clergy inspected prospective couples for marriage to make sure they were normal physically and mentally. The great Unitarian activist John Haynes Holmes encouraged his fellow ministers in the Liberal Ministers Association of New York to perform nothing but healthy marriages for the conservation of the normal family, so that in the interest of improving society, defectives did not propagate. John Haynes Holmes wrote,
Nothing is more important, to my mind, in our modern treatment of the question of marriage than to use our powers of social control to prevent many people from marrying. Those, namely, whose marriage, for one reason or another, can be nothing but a tragedy.
when the Universalists passed their Declaration of Social Principles in 1917, its working program included the following. We want to safeguard marriage so that every child shall be born with a sound physical, mental, and moral heritage. Birth control or even sterilization were ways to control indiscriminate breeding. When Clarence Russell Skinner, the great Universalist social activist, published The Social Implication of Universalism, he declared,
The new enthusiasm for humanity readily pictures a time when, through eugenics, education, friendship, play, worship, and work, the criminal will be no more.
Throughout the United States, sermon contests were held on the subject of better breeding. Sponsored by the American Eugenics Society, the contests had a central theme: religion and eugenics. Does the church have any responsibility for improving the human stock? One participant in 1928 was Homer Gleason of the First Universalist Church in Rochester, Minnesota. He wrote to the society,
Please allow me to add that I have greatly enjoyed my preparation for this work. I have thought for years that I was somewhat of a eugenist, but 5 months of intensive study have thoroughly convinced me. Surely this is a great cause.
Many progressives were also organizing to restrict immigration of what they perceived as inferior peoples. They declared a need to preserve the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant heritage in the face of new lower classes of immigrants, especially those who were not Protestants.
Today, it probably surprises us that some Unitarian and Universalists supported eugenics. We generally think our faith empowers us to speak for those who otherwise have no voice and to advocate for those who cannot advocate for themselves.
Even today, we UUs sometimes chime in with our ready answers to the world's problems. It makes me wonder which ones may embarrass us if we live long enough to look back on them. Consider this response from a UU ecological justice minister in 2017. He was asked what the most effective solution might be for overpopulation. He replied, global warming. An asteroid strike or a nuclear winter might also do the job, but we can't depend on either to occur. On the other hand, global warming is the solution that will arise naturally because we won't face the problem. In the unlikely event that we do face the problem, it is likely that we have already passed the point of no return. Now, I agree that the climate crisis is critical for the survival of life that resembles anything we imagine as life, but I sense a certain delectation in the Rev's imagining of how an asteroid strike or nuclear winter might do the job. Or I invite you to consider that heavy metal piece that I chose for the offertory. Selfish has the refrain, world population is out of control, repeated again and again, and it blames selfish people who have too many children. That's too simple an explanation for our problems, I'm afraid. Call to mind the image that I use. I chose it in that video for that unlistenable music. I was grabbed by the picture of that massive overburdened truck. I first met it as the frontispiece of Alan Weissman's book, Countdown, Our Last Best Hope for a Future on Earth. Like Weissman, I took it to be a graphic metaphor for the overcrowding of our planet. But it's so much more complicated than that. The photographer, Roberta Neumeier, says that those temporary workers carpooling home from jobs in Libya with goods they'd purchased with their wages were actually wealthy traders returning home. It is not a horde of refugees planning to cross the Mediterranean to invade and pillage Europe. They are not less than human objects to warn us of the dangers of overpopulation. Now, I still think it's a great image of overcrowding, but I wonder what it says about me that I chose a picture of Africans crowded onto that truck. It may be that white racism is deeply embedded behind my own views of world population. I don't know about you. I don't have answers today. I want to say that every person counts. Population is an abstract, aggregative concept, but real answers come from understanding problems in their particularity, from letting go of what we know and learning to listen. Our first principle declares the inherent worth and dignity of every person. If we give that principle more than lip service, I ask you, what are we doing today and planning for tomorrow that proves this is indeed our first principle? Does every person count? Or are we like some politicians, just as happy to ignore some people when taking a census? In the end, there is no solution to world population, as though if I could just get people to see it my way, the problem would go away. The only way to make every person count is to know and love all the individuals we can, affirming their inherent worth and dignity. I look forward to doing that with you as we return in person to meetings on Sundays and as we move out into the world together. As I conclude, I'm thinking about Rodney King. You remember him and what some people have called his prayer. Why can't we all just get along? He said it in a press conference during the 1992 LA insurrection following the acquittal of his police attackers. Folk singer Fred Small, who is now Minister for Climate Justice at Arlington Street UU Church in Boston, called it Rodney King's blessing. And in his song, he strings together King's words at the press conference with the refrain, "People, can we all get along?" We can all get along. People, you know, we're all stuck here for a while. Let's try to work it out. Psalm 133 says it's a beautiful thing when sisters and brothers dwell together in unity. That's the vision that I want to hold up on World Population Day, with thanks to our singers. So, sisters and brothers, there's a lot of work ahead of us. We're all stuck here for a while. And while we're here, we can make a difference through who we are and how we act. So may it be.